And welcome back to Moving Conversations. I'm Brian Ritchie. Joining me as always is Nora St. John. Good morning, Nora. How are you doing?
Hey, Brian. Well, it's that polleny time of year. So I got a little bit of stuff going on. So I apologize if I sound a little funky, but otherwise I'm great.
I've been sneezing us up a storm. One of my
Yeah.
employees has sneezed a minimum of 10 times a day.
Oh,
And I've
God.
been about 5. And it's nonstop. And we keep thinking, when is this going to end? Yesterday and
Oh,
today have been sort of drizzly. And I keep hoping that the water is going to tame that down.
yeah.
Uh, But what's interesting, we've recorded a lot of these podcasts based on our availability. We've been available a lot
Yeah.
more during the
Yeah. Yeah.
spring, which is awesome. We've caught up and
Yeah.
we're ahead a little bit. So by the time people listen to this, it's going to be
It'll be
June,
summer.
July.
In the
It'll be
middle of
summertime.
summer.
So people are going to be thinking, what are you talking about spring? What are you talking about pollen?
You might be at the beach for all we know. You might
Exactly.
be on vacation.
Exactly.
You might listen to this on the plane flight over to Italy, where I think everybody I know is going to Italy this summer again.
Oh, geez. That's one place I've never been. And I'm looking forward to it. And someday I
Yeah,
think I will.
absolutely.
Ah, well, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about assessments. You came
Mhm.
into DC and we recorded a bunch of stuff. And one of the things we recorded about was assessments. And we thought it'd be great to talk about it on the podcast, but we did more of a generalized assessment technique, need for it, etc. And I was thinking, well, why don't we get a little bit more specific? Because something that I see in a lot of gyms and a lot of things is postural assessments.
Yeah, static postural assessment. Like how does
Yeah,
somebody stand? Right?
exactly.
Yeah.
And I thought that'd be an interesting topic for us to cover.
Mhm.
The need for it. Why are we doing it? Is there a need? And what happens when we take that into motion, how that changes the body.
Right.
So, yeah, why don't we go from there?
So I'm gonna start with a little controversy maybe. There's been for some people like posture is the thing, right? Posture
Mhm.
is like as long as they correct the posture, then that's really the lens into correcting movement and correcting somebody's ability to function well.
Yep.
For other people, and there's some studies that were like posture makes no difference whatsoever. And I'm not quoting studies, but there was a lot of discussion about the value of postural assessment versus, does it have a value? Does it not have a value? And I think we need to get into that a bit, and then talk specifically about it. But certainly in my experience, and I'm just going to speak from my experience, and Brian can speak from his. Um, Static postural assessment is one piece of the puzzle. It's not the whole puzzle by any means,
No.
because people can stand in a way that implies certain things about their movement. And then when you take them into a dynamic assessment where they're actually moving, they may
Mhm.
look completely different.
Yep.
So, and what you think you saw in the static assessment may not show up in the dynamic assessment. So, but that doesn't mean that static assessment doesn't have value in terms of getting a first view or some first ideas about a client and what you might be doing with them.
Absolutely. I find the
Mhm.
same thing. When you First of all, anytime we do an assessment, and we covered this in the assessment episode, we're people pleasers. So you have someone
Yes,
stand there
yes.
and I try and make them wiggle and march and do things and then just relax your body. Well, you see that they feel like they're being watched. And as soon as someone's watched, they
Whoop.
get taller, their shoulders go back. And I'm like, relax, stop correcting yourself. And it's almost impossible not to want to correct that to a certain degree. And
Yeah,
now,
absolutely.
you know, to be honest, they can try all they want. They're never going to get perfect posture. Some bodies just are not going to attain that
Right.
because they've spent so many years in bad posture that they can get closer, but they
Yeah.
can't get perfect posture today.
Yeah.
Maybe maybe a year down the road or after some intense work, possibly. Uh, but just taking a look at their posture, at least from my point of view, I find it a helpful tool at the beginning, just
Mhm.
because I can see what what stands out,
Yeah, exactly.
what major stuff.
Like you talking about, what is it, the 10-foot rule or the 10
Yeah,
seconds, the 10 feet rule or whatever it is, right? Where
exactly.
it's like, what do I see when and a couple things I want to say about that. One is very often I'm doing that static postural assessment without telling them what I'm doing.
Yes.
So, for example, I'm just saying, hey, just stand there for a moment, or take a walk around the room, or something, or go over there, or I'm watching them when they come in because I'm actually trying to catch them unawares. I'm trying to
Yes.
catch them, when they're like, or maybe ideally, if they're standing and talking to another client, that's my best bet, because that's
Yeah.
typically when they're kind of more relaxed. They're also their energy's coming out the way it would be coming out if they're talking to somebody, and
Mhm.
that's when I really see it. So a lot of times yes, I may do it more formally, but I also try to do it surreptitiously because that'll
I
often
like
give me
that.
more information.
I like that, and yeah, it definitely. If you could even keep them talking,
Yes.
I'll sometimes say,
Yeah.
and I prefer to do it from behind rather than in front because people can
Yeah.
sense that they're being watched.
Yeah.
So I'll
Absolutely.
say, "Face yourself in the mirror," and I'll look like I just need to jot something down.
Exactly. Yep.
And I'm actually looking at them going,
Yep.
"Oh," duh, 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 and
Yep.
again,
Yep.
10
Yep.
seconds is not long. It's usually when I say, "Okay, now turn to the side," and they're like, "Oh, and that's when they realize they're being watched a
Right.
little bit.
Right.
And I've tried to walk around them a little bit,
Yeah.
but that's usually when they realize, and it's like, "Oh," and you see them begin to pull their head back and their shoulders back and whatnot,
Yep.
and again, I just say, "Just relax." It's just to me, it's a snapshot of
Yeah.
today,
Yeah. Of this moment. Yep.
and that's the important thing to remember of this moment.
Yeah.
If I took this a week ago or
Yep.
a week from now, with or
Mhm.
without exercise, I may see something different based on how they slept last night. How many times have I had a client come in and their head's cocked a little funny? And I'll say, "Everything okay?" I said, "Man, I just slept funny. My neck is a little,"
Mhm.
but because they have their head cocked a little weird, all of a sudden, if I saw that in a client of during a postural assessment, I may, "Oh, wow, look at
What's
that."
going on there? Yeah, what's going on there? What's happening?
But it may be very temporary.
Yeah. One other thing that I really wanna pound on a bit is there is no perfect posture. All right. There
No.
is not like one of the real challenges I find in a lot of postural training and things is there is this, this plumb line magical, everybody should look like this
Yeah.
implication under it that is just wrong. I mean, really,
Yep.
it's just wrong. Because I've worked with a million people with a million different structures that are not ideal posture in any way, that are very functional to high level functional. I think about I mentioned this a lot, but I think of a lot of the swimmers I've worked with, except with a lot of
Mhm.
synchronized swimmers and competitive swimmers. Their posture is kind of funky.
Mhm.
Usually their static posture is often a little funky, a little odd, but that works for them in terms of being high level performers. And even
Yep.
just people who are my ordinary folk who just have a deeper lordotic curve or a little more kyphosis or a slightly forward head or they shift over to one side. Like there's all kinds of just very normal things that can still be quite functional and quite fine. So it's not like even
Yep.
when I see those variations and I'm trying to get them to some sort of ideal in my mind, I'm
Mhm.
really trying to look and see how those deviations, if you want to call them that, or that lack of symmetry, which is sometimes how I also think about it, how is that serving them? Like, is it serving them or is it causing trouble? Or is it
That's
neutral?
the key. Yes. Uh, when you mentioned deep lordotic curve, you and I both know someone who has a very deep lordotic curve that
Mhm,
you wouldn't know just by looking at them until they stand and you're like, "Oh, interesting. That's
mhm,
a pretty deep curve." And we've seen
mhm.
people with kyphosis, we've seen people with forward head carriage. And what I always do is I look at all these things and I mark them down.
Yep,
And I'm now going to compare and contrast in my mind with the things that they've talked about. So
exactly. There we go.
if they've got a lot of roundedness in the shoulders and they're suffering from, you know, some kind of shoulder
Neck
impingement,
problem,
neck
shoulder
problem, full
problem, carpal
right,
tunnel, elbow tendonitis, right?
right.
Anything happening, you're like, okay, well, I'm going to look up the chain and maybe there's something I can work on there that might change the rest of it.
Exactly, exactly, and that's what is going to do it for me. If I
Yeah.
see them have a big sway back posture where their rib cage sits behind their hip bones when they stand, okay, that causes a lot more compression and it changes their center of gravity. Okay, their hips are shoved forward. They've got low back pain. I
Mhm.
wonder if that could be contributing to it. I'm
Right.
not going to, and again, it's not my job. I always say we're sort of body detectives. Yes, but at the same time, it's not my job to diagnose. It's my job to notice and say, Well, maybe, maybe not, but
Exactly.
it's a place to maybe start. And if we begin correcting some of that, oh, the pain's going away. Okay, I may be on the right track, or it's not touching it at all. Well, okay, it's might be something
Fine.
else.
Yeah, it's exactly that. I mean, that's what our work always is creating a potential hypothesis. Like, oh,
Mhm.
maybe they're having some neck and shoulder problems because they seem to have a really forward head and they happen to be an accountant, right? And
Yep,
they're working at a computer all day. Well,
yep.
okay, that seems like a logical place to start. So we start working on that. Things get better. Okay, I'm on the right track. I continue on, or absolutely nothing changes. Let's look elsewhere. Maybe it's from the lower
Mhm.
body. Maybe it's from how they're holding their hands. Maybe it's their ergonomic situation. Maybe it's how they sleep. So you got to
Yep.
look for some other things. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's important. I wanna
Mhm.
sort of push on this. It's important to look at all the different variables. This is a
Yeah.
single variable.
Yep. Yep.
And while it may be a highlighted one, when you're looking
Mhm.
at it because they have an issue and you're like, "Ooh, that could be a big part of it." It
Yep.
could be.
Yep.
But again, you've talked about, your client that you used to have that had that really low slung car to the ground that
Yeah.
was in a
Yeah.
deep flexed posture
Right.
driving in this low car for for periods of time on the weekend. Well, I don't care what their posture looks like. That was exacerbating his condition more so than just a static posture.
Yes.
So
Absolutely.
it's
Absolutely.
important to look at all the variables and be able to say,
Yep.
okay, what variables are important, what aren't, and just look at all of them. And if we can correct others like ergonomics or, change the position of I'm looking at the camera right now. Well, what if my camera was down there and I had to stare down all day long? Well, do you
Uh-huh.
think my neck might bother me by the end of the day?
A likely thing.
Yeah, so you move it up and suddenly, oh, I can stand in better posture. I can sit up in better posture and, address my meetings or whoever I'm talking to online. So there are things that can be changed very simply that may have a profound effect on that. So again, it's just one variable.
I want to use one client story, which was purely a postural correction that made a big difference. I think I mentioned this before, but one of my clients was she actually was the owner of a large greeting card company. So she went to a lot of publicity events and meetings and parties and that kind of thing. And her general posture was basically kind of sway back. So very posteriorly tilted, slung back, weight kind of on her heels, a little bit rounded forward with her shoulders. And she had a lot of low back pain. And she said when she stood for more than 10 or 15 minutes, that her back would really start to hurt. And this was problematic because she had to stand at parties and things a lot. So I basically said, well, why don't you just think about basically tilting your pelvis forward and standing a little more with the weight in your ball of your feet? Just, shift those simple things.
Yep.
And 2 days later, she was at a party for another, and she said, "Yeah, I was there for 45 minutes instead of 20 minutes before things started to get irritated." So that was where that value of recognizing a postural pattern, especially one that was a static postural pattern that was causing her pain because she was holding that static postural pattern while she was doing stuff, right? Because she had to
Yeah.
stand a lot. Was like just like boom, boom. That was one of those really quick little moments of success,
Yep.
and that's something that's that can be really useful. It can be again,
Mhm.
but in this case, that's because it related directly to the function she was trying to do, which was stand for a long period of time.
And what's interesting, you said the perfect word for this, awareness.
Yeah.
Getting them aware of their own posture. Most people, when I do my postural assessments, a lot after I, take that quick glance,
Yeah.
I'll talk to them about it. And I'll say,
Yeah.
here's what I saw. And I say, I don't know what this means yet, but here's what I saw.
Right. Right.
And for the most part, I can't tell you how many times people say, wow, really? And especially something like a lateral shift where their shoulders sit
Yeah.
on their over their hips to the side. And I'll put them in front of the mirror and I say, just take a look at how your arms hang. One's in front of your body and the other's got swinging to the side. And they're like, oh my gosh, I never noticed that I do that. And I say, look, probably it's environmental, maybe the way you sat on the couch. We all have our spot.
Right. Yep. Yep.
I
Yep.
watch Big Bang Theory and Sheldon has his spot. Well, you know what? Everybody has their spot that they like to sit on.
And the way
And
they
if
like to sit.
and the way they like to sit.
Yeah.
And I actually had a spot in a sofa and it was okay, it was an IKEA sofa. The thing was built like a brick outhouse. I mean, you could not break this thing. But I had it for, I don't even know how many years and years and years. And eventually I sat on the other side of the sofa one day, I don't know why. And I thought, why am I sitting so high? I and then I actually tipped the sofa over and went, wow, over the years, that part of the sofa had dipped down. I had actually literally bent some of the bolts. I mean, we're talking years and years. And it caused my whole body to sort of lean and shift over onto the arm of the sofa. It was very
Yeah.
comfortable.
Right.
But did that affect my posture? Possibly. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah,
I
yeah,
would
yeah.
spend an hour, 2 hours, whatever it is at night, sitting
Yep.
there watching TV or whatever.
Yep.
And it's the same thing with women. I find women sling one hip to the side
Yep.
more than the other if they've had children, because one side is
Yep.
where they carried that kid on their hip for years.
Yep.
And their kid's now going to college, but they still have that shift.
And if they don't have kids, it's the purse.
It's the
You know,
purse or
women
the
carry
backpack
purses
or,
or the backpack, and they tend to carry it on one side, and then their ribs will just shift over to that side, and
yep,
you know, all those little things.
yep. And it's really they're unaware
Yeah.
of where their body is in space. I mean, most people are. If you ask them, they really don't understand. And when you put them into their body, and even just asking something simple, you could try this with your next client when you see them, or you could try it with your spouse. Just say, where's your weight on the ball, on your feet, on the
Mhm.
balls of your feet or in your heels? And you're going to see their eyes will shift up to the sky and they're going to be like, let me think. And it's like, wow, really? You have to think about that. It's not just an automatic because they don't know where their body is in space.
I would use a funny example here because, you know, we're
Mhm.
on video and there's always like, you know, improve my appearance on Zoom
Yeah.
videos. And I feel like we have that filter in our mind.
Yeah.
Many of us, I mean, some people see, you know, something much worse than they are when they look in the mirror, but a lot of people look in the mirror, they remember how they looked when they were 22, and somehow that's still the image that comes up, right? Because you know, more than one client, like a really many more than one client, I've started to talk to them about their posture, and maybe they're very forward head or they're very round shouldered or whatever the situation is. And they come to me a few days later or something, and they say, "Wow, you know, I was walking down the street and I happened to catch a glance in the mirror, right in the window, in the reflection in the window as I was walking by. You are so right. My posture is terrible." But even if they had seen that same picture 100 other times,
Didn't
I really
register.
do think we just put the filter in and it's like, I look great, or whatever it is, or they just don't see
Yep.
it. Right. So awareness is definitely key. Like, what am I doing? Where is my body? I don't know. I mean, most of us don't spend much time thinking about it.
I was talking with a client who had that exact thing happen to them. But you know how some stores have a 45-degree window as you're going to walk into the store? And as
Yes.
you're walking by that 45 degrees, if you glance at
Yeah.
it, well, suddenly you're walking into yourself.
Right.
He
Right.
actually told
Right.
me he saw that and he started to get out of the way for the old man walking toward him. And
Oh,
he
that's
said,
so cute.
"I
Yeah.
can't believe," and then I
That's
realized
me.
that was me. He said,
Yeah.
"I don't see myself as that." And I mean, yes,
No.
the
No.
guy was in his early 70s and whatnot, but in his mind, he felt in his 50s. He felt still young
Exactly.
and fairly vibrant.
Exactly. Yep.
And then
Yep.
but
Yep.
he's like, "I guess I'm not that guy anymore." I was like, "Well, that's a good realization. I'm not 20 anymore either." So,
So exactly. I mean, this is just the nature of it. So getting aware of posture is one of those, you know, important things, and it really does help you to understand where you are and what you're doing. So
yeah.
let's talk a little bit about what we see in a postural assessment, what we're kind of looking for, and what some of it means.
Okay.
Right. So first things first is I always look for just general symmetry, and I'm
Mhm.
usually looking front and back, symmetry across the midline. And one of the things I say about symmetry is, and there's been a lot of studies about this, humans have a very natural appreciation for symmetry.
Yes.
That our eye will, like, there was, I quote this study a lot, but basically they had somebody sitting in a room, presumably, and they would flash very, very, very short images of faces, a whole bunch of them in a row. And they had to push a button that said that face was beautiful, that face was not beautiful.
Mhm.
And they're like within, you know, within milliseconds. And basically, when they correlated beauty and not beauty to the faces on the screen, symmetry was beautiful and non-symmetry was not.
Yes.
And that they made that judgment within seconds, within like less than seconds of seeing an image pop up. So our natural ability to recognize symmetry is built in, it's hardwired.
Hmm.
So, you as a movement professional, you movement professionals out there, this is not something that you may have to pay attention to it, but it's not something you don't innately have.
Hmm.
Right. So when people say, how do you see that? Because people, I'm sure I know people, I've seen people ask you, how do you see that? How do you know
Yeah.
that? And people ask me that too. And it's like some of that is just paying attention. Like you
Yep.
actually have an ability to see that. All of us do. You just have to pay attention and recognize it.
Yep. No, no question and that's one reason why that lateral shift when you're looking at someone from behind and looking right to left side, you can see, well, one side is either tilted up or one side is very different than the other.
Right.
And
The
it could be
shoulders high, or there's more
yeah,
space between the ribs and the side and the arm on one
yep,
side, or there's
or their
hips
hips are
sling out
shifted
to
out.
one
Yep.
side. Yeah. All those.
Yep, or a foot, one ankle is turned in, or the knee is
Yep.
turned in. All of these things we can see, and it's sort of, huh, okay. And these are things, again, we're not diagnosing, we're not doing anything. We're just noticing.
Yeah, exactly. Just
We're
paying attention. And,
just paying
and,
attention.
and in my notes, it's like, I have a little, I have outline of a person, front, back, and side, just a little like outline. And I'm an arrow drawer. So it's like, arrow head
Mm,
going forward, ribs going back, deep curve, a rib shifted to the right. Like I'll arrow the whole thing. So I just get a sense of where things are in their body relative to, some mythical plumb line.
exactly. Exactly. I'm not a fan of the plumb line just in general
Yeah.
because people's centers of gravity
Are all
change as
different.
we age. Yeah.
Yeah.
And a large person versus a small person is going to have a very different one, just where they carry their weight.
Yeah.
Because if I have more weight anteriorly, I'm going to probably shift posteriorly a little bit just for counterbalance.
Yep.
Someone who's more muscular is going to be different than someone who's very slight.
Hmm.
So we can't just take that plumb bob, plumb line and apply it to every single person.
Mm-mm.
For me, it's more of along the lines of, do they look fairly straight when they stand to the side? If I'm looking from the side, front to
Yeah.
back, do
Yeah.
they look pretty straight? Or
Right.
does their head really look like it's forward? Or do their
Right.
shoulders really look rounded or something like that?
Or their
Again,
hips really
what's up?
back or something, right? What like just a rough, because it's also, the plumb line implies that all of our structures are the same.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I always think about with the plumb line is, and this is, looking at the rib cage, for
Right.
example, right? I mean, if somebody has a deeper rib cage front to back, there's kind of that center of balance is going to be different over their pelvis, and somebody who has a very, very shallow rib cage.
Right.
Or less, if their spine, all those things are just going to change where that center of gravity needs to be for that particular client.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
And I mean, you and I use each other,
Yeah,
because
as
we're
good
very
example.
different bodies. I've got a gigantic rib cage. You've got a much smaller rib cage.
Uh,
My pelvis is like out here and yours is much more narrow. And so seeing two different bodies, side by side, you can really see. And even when we had your brother in, when we were doing the
yeah, the
assessments
low back
here,
assessment. Yep.
we were very different standing there where we're both nearly 6 feet tall. I'm a little over, he
Mhm.
was a little, we were similar-ish in height.
Yep.
And how we carried ourselves, how long torsoed, long
Yep.
legged, how we
Yep.
carried our bodies
Yep.
really was different. And you can't compare the two of us. It's just not going to work.
No, and this is one of those things that it's actually kind of obvious, but not always acknowledged, which is there harmony within that structure?
Mm,
Right, because and this gets to that kind of, it's not really woo-woo because it's not actually woo-woo. If you look at a structure that looks at ease in standing, right? You'll just look at
mhm.
it and it's just, they're at ease, they're comfortable, they're relaxed. You don't see any stress building up anywhere. Other people you look at and even just standing, you see like low back tension, or you
Yep.
see shoulder tension, or you see something else that looks, there's just stress in the body, right? They're not they're just not comfortable standing there, or their knees are really locked back and hyperextended, for example.
Yep.
So you'll see those tension moments, and some clients you don't see any tension moments.
Yep.
And again, that's tuning in, that's paying attention, but it doesn't take much observation of just ordinary folk. And one of the things I love about postural assessment is you can do it anywhere, anytime. And
Anytime.
when I was a new teacher, I used to live in Oakland, and I was there was a lake, Lake Merritt, I used to live next to, and I would just go down and sit on a bench and watch people walk by. And you see everything, and you see the bodies that look really just harmonious, and everything's moving smoothly and graceful, and the bodies that are so awkward, you're wondering how they actually are getting around the lake. Right.
Yes.
And that it doesn't take much to notice that. You just have to pay attention, and you recognize that body's moving well, that body's not moving well.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I tell people that all the time when instructors come up and they want to know how I see the body. It's like, okay, go to the mall.
Yeah.
Go,
Start
like you
looking.
go to the lake, watch.
Yeah.
Well, what will if I don't know the person, I won't know what's wrong. I say, you don't need to.
No.
Just watch, because just looking at the body, they rotate easier to one side than the other. Okay.
Yep.
That doesn't tell me anything. It
Yep.
just tells me what I see.
Yeah.
I jot it down.
Yep.
And in looking at posture, it's the same thing. So I see a rib shift to one side. Okay. Jot it down.
Interesting.
It's interesting.
Interesting. Note
You
this
know?
up. Note. Yeah.
And what I find the postural assessment does more than anything else, and it goes back to your symmetry when you're looking side to side, front to back, is just I'm looking for muscular imbalances.
Mhm.
Because
Yeah.
you can see, especially in the spine, if I do see a rib shift, it's like, okay, when I have them in all fours, or if I have them lie on their stomach, I'll be able to, sometimes put my hands on their back and see if one side of their erectors is really inflamed, is really more pronounced, more hypertrophy.
Whatever, is bigger in some way.
Yeah, it's a bigger,
Yeah.
it's a bigger tenderloin. One side has more meat. You're feeling that. You're like, okay, this side's a little bit bigger, but that might tell me, okay, I need to work on stretching this side a little bit more, or strengthening the other side a little bit more. And knowing those muscular imbalances in my brain is just like, okay, we just need to balance out the system to try and
Mhm.
create that harmony.
Right.
And again, with rotation, maybe they rotate really easily to one side, and the other side, bonk, they stop. Okay. I wonder why. Let's see, can they even rotate? Oh, they can. Okay. Let's start focusing a little bit on that. Or whatever they need for their body to get that way. And when you mention harmony, it's interesting you say that. I had a client yesterday who, she has a very interesting body in that her shoulders are way up high all the time.
Mm.
She's having cervical issues, but it's like her tension level in her neck, in her cervical, in her scalenes, and everything never, ever, ever lets go. Even at rest, even, I couldn't, for the life of me, if I push down on her shoulders, they're not going down. It's almost as
Wow.
though that's just where her structure is.
Uh-huh.
But with all the other issues she has cervically, there's something telling me that there's probably overly tight, and we work on flexibility and mobility and all of that, as well as some strengthening of the right muscles. But in looking at it, it was sort of, why is it so elevated all the time? And it just doesn't want to go down. So it's just one of those things like, interesting.
Yeah.
And again, I've had her for a while, and she's experienced more discomfort in her neck since traveling and things. So we're focusing a little bit on cervical issues more now. So it's like, okay, again, I don't have to know why, but I noticed it again. I jotted it down and I said, okay, let's see where this is a month from now when we're doing supposedly the right things. Does it change?
Yeah.
Does it not change?
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, maybe we have to start thinking about something else. Or maybe it's just her structure. She was born that way, and that tension line just isn't going to go anywhere.
It's part of our hypothesis, and then you test it, right? You make a hypothesis, and then you go down a path based on what you're thinking might be happening. And then it's like that decision tree. And then you get to a point where it's like, okay, that's working, that's not. So that means I'm going to explore more about, let's say, the mobility of her thoracic cage, right? Or something like
Yep.
that. Or her breathing pattern, or what's happening in the front of her chest. Like, is that why the shoulders are coming up? Right. So you kind of have, I always find I have multiple paths available in my brain, like little decision tree moments. And I go down one, and maybe that works, or maybe it doesn't. Then I
Mhm.
hop to my next one, and maybe that works, and
Yep.
maybe it doesn't, and or maybe it works kind of, but I've got to refine it. And that's really that process. And postural assessment is just that beginning step.
Right. And again, in an assessment, after I do my medical history with them and sit down and find out all their backstory, that's when the postural assessment takes place. Now, I'm not going to say I'm not looking at their posture the entire time they're sitting in front of me, because I am. I'm
Exactly.
constantly analyzing when they walk in. Uh, but when I do the so-called static postural assessment, the formal one, uh, comes that next step, because I do want to see, what do I just see, hopefully with their body mostly at rest.
Hmm.
But something that we haven't really talked about is the difference between static versus dynamic. What happens once that body gets in motion?
Right. And I want to use an example of that, because I think about two clients. Um, I think about two clients, both of whom in the static assessment, without knowing anything else about them,
Hmm.
they were both relatively kyphotic, shoulders forward, head forward.
Hmm.
So if I was just to put them in, if I was to put the two of them side by side, I would consider the pattern quite similar. Okay, which that's not uncommon. But this was the difference. One of them, one of them was extremely stiff. So her kyphosis, like she could barely, in terms of the mobility of her spine, she really couldn't straighten up. Like
Mm,
she really didn't even have neutral thoracic extension.
okay.
It was just really stiff. So we had to work a lot on thoracic mobility in her case, and head and stuff, but a lot of thorax. The other client looked just the same, but in her case, it was a collapsed posture. She was so
Oh,
mobile in her thorax that her natural position was to collapse into her mobility, but she had the ability to come into actually rather extreme thoracic extension. So for me, I want to bring that up because that's where the
yeah.
static posture kind of breaks down as you look at that, and that tells you something, but it doesn't always tell you, like it tells you what they do when they're like what their habit is when they're
Hmm.
standing. It doesn't necessarily tell you what their potential is when they're moving.
Right.
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 And so that's just, I kind of want to bring that up when you talk about, how things go from static to dynamic.
I love that story because it's very true. You don't know how a body's going to move when you're looking at it in a static position,
No.
because I've had dancers here.
Yeah.
I've had people who are, uh, I tell the story when I teach sometimes about one of my clients, Phil, former client. Uh, he's from England, from London, uh, filmmaker, great, great guy. First time he came into me, I would say he was just your typical Brit, kind of pudgy looking, never really took fitness too seriously, as an adult. He was active, but he never really lifted, heavy weights or anything like that, or took that seriously. And he mentioned that he was active and he's run marathons and everything. And my first thought was, wow, that must have been a long time ago, because of the way he looked. I was making assumptions based on what I
Yeah.
saw.
Yeah.
And even in his postural assessment and things, he moved fairly well. Okay. And I put him on the treadmill. And I walked away, and the treadmill's outside my office. And so I can listen. I wanted him to warm up. And I was hearing the treadmill go, but I wasn't hearing him on it. I
Oh.
wasn't hearing his feet. And I was like, that punk is just standing there. He's not on the
Uh-huh.
machine.
Ah.
So I gave him a minute, thinking maybe he's tying his shoe. No, 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 I'm not hearing anything. And I walk out, and he's running, and I'm
Wow.
not
He was
hearing
that
his
quiet.
feet.
Really? On a treadmill?
He was like a gazelle. I
Whoa.
heard
I've
no
never had that
footfall,
experience. Uh-huh.
and he was just gliding. I've never seen it before. And I said, and
Oh.
when he said he ran marathons, and I said, "You are a born runner."
Yeah.
And he said, "I've always been able to run." And
Yeah.
I was
Really.
flabbergasted. But
That's a good
again,
story.
you would never know it by looking at him. Again, you make
Right.
assumptions when you look at
Yes.
someone. So
Yep.
when you saw those two clients, if all you did was look at that and all your programming was based on the static posture, you would have programmed them nearly identically, even though they were worlds apart.
Yep, exactly. Needed completely different paths.
Yeah, because we have these judgments that we naturally begin to make, based on years and years and years of experience that we see someone with a forward head carriage, we kind of know some of what we're going to be dealing with, or, palms are facing backwards. We know that their rotator cuff is probably going to be a little weak or whatnot. There are certain things we've seen because we've seen a million cases of them. But that doesn't mean it's going to be that way for everybody. And you really have to watch their body in motion to get the true story.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
So one other thing that's like, so still like what other benefits do I get out of static posture? So some of the other benefits that I find, again, these are just like the things that I find useful, are are what's happening. Sorry, what's happening between the legs, the pelvis, and the spine? How is force
Mm.
transferring through that fairly critical juncture?
Mhm.
Are their hips turned out? Like, do they naturally stand with their feet turned out? They stand with their feet turned in. Is one leg turned out? Is one leg turned in? Is the pelvis again cocked to one side, right? Shifted over the weight to one side, or rotated back on one side, or lifted up on one side? Like just noting those, and not even that those are things that are major things, but just noting how do they
Mhm.
live? How do they live in that relationship between their legs, their pelvis, and their spine? And that's something where I find a static assessment gives me some information, but
Mhm.
that's really where you see when they're talking to somebody or they're talking to you, where did they shift into to hang out?
Yeah.
That's when I get more information about that. It's still static, but like they've gotten relaxed and suddenly they're shifting over to their right leg, their hip is swinging out to the right, they're turning out their left foot, and they're shifting their ribs over to the right as well, or whatever it is, right? Then you really
Yep.
see, this may be where they actually hang out, which
Yep.
tells you a lot about the muscle balance. It tells you a lot about, if you're interested in the anterior and posterior slings, or how the core is working, how the balance through the ribs and the spine and the pelvis is working, right? That'll tell you where their bias is, where their strength is, or where their support is, and where the support is not so strong.
And what's interesting also when you look at that, I'm sure you've seen, like I have, a million times, when someone's just standing there, you can see where they get stuck, where the
Uh-huh. Yeah.
energy doesn't flow
Yes.
between those parts. Because again,
Yep.
it should go shoulders through the thoracic, down through the lumbar spine, through the hips, through the feet, legs, and down, through
Yeah.
the feet. But you'll be able to see, especially I find looking from the side, boom, one area just looks like, okay, the energy will get stuck there,
Right. Low
and it'll
back
get
is a
low
classic,
back.
or anterior
Exactly.
hip,
Anterior
right?
hip,
Or
pelvis.
knee, pelvis. Yeah, exactly.
And you can see it's like, oh, everything else looks normal, normal. Ooh, something's going on there.
Yep.
And then when you put them through some kind of movement, you can see, oh yeah, that's going to validate that thought process, because you're like, oh yeah, you're moving fine until there, and now you're hitting, that's the wall. Boom. You've got that brick wall. And then after it can move, but that one spot is just not moving properly. And I refer to it gets stuck. It's sticky.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see that in, so let's say somebody does a static assessment, and then they walk. You just have them
Yes.
walk, or in your case, you have them maybe on the treadmill doing a warm up, or they're walking across the room, and then you
Yep.
see, oh, right, the femurs are not going into extension, right? There maybe their legs are just way in front of them, or that right leg is really turning out, or what I often listen for and watch for in any kind of gait, anything, is the rhythm. And you hear this a lot
Right.
in the treadmill. Boom, 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 boom. Right. They're landing heavier on the right foot. Or
Mhm.
I always try to almost sing their gait to myself. I know this is goofy, because sometimes, like, you'll watch somebody go down the street, and especially in certain neighborhoods, like you'll see somebody who's kind of walking with a bit of a strut, but it's
Uh-huh.
but it's like a ba da da ba ba da da, right? There's a very asymmetrical rhythm to their
Uh-huh.
strut. Like one hip's really gliding forward and the other one's like staying back, and they're leading with that left side or the right side, whatever it is.
Yep.
And you'll see that with a client on a more subtle level potentially, but you'll still see that. And
Yep.
that lets me know, yes, things are not moving well through that pelvis. They're not moving evenly. They're not
Yep.
transferring the force evenly through that area.
And it can happen to anybody. When we were in Phoenix at the Pilates on tour, I had someone in one of my classes and we were doing some walking type of stuff. And this is a professional mover. And she looked like she probably was a former dancer.
Mm.
Her hips moved so far to one side when she walked, but to the other side, they just went bunk and sort of got stuck.
Oh, like they hit a
And one,
wall.
yeah, and one side had a natural, almost like a Shakira, sway to it. And then they came back to the center and then they stopped.
Bam.
And they
Yeah.
went out and then they came back and stopped. And I was watching that and I thought, that is so interesting that she had that. And we were working on trying to get the hips to move a little bit better. And as she was doing it, you could see she was trying to do it, but it just wasn't coming naturally to her. And
It
it was
was
sort of
effort.
it was a lot of effort to
It was
try
like
and get that
pushing
side.
into that lateral glide rather than it falling into that lateral glide. Yeah.
Right,
Mhm.
right. So that was, again, if it was a client, that would be something I'd be like, "Oh, okay,
What's
we're gonna take a
happening over
look. What's
there?
happening there? Because
Hmm.
energy is not transferring well.
Right.
It's definitely getting stuck."
Yep. Yep.
And that's what, when we do the put someone into motion, that's the kind of thing that you can see that you may or may not, you get a hint of it with the static, but you
Mhm.
may not get that precise, oh yeah, that's the side, that's what's going on, you know?
I find particularly the lateral system and the rotational system, you won't see as much
Yep.
in the static alignment. So the sagittal plane, I can get some pretty good tips. They've got some mobility in their thorax, they've got no
Mhm.
mobility in their lumbar, they're anteriorly tilted. Like all those things are going to, they're hyperextending their knees. Those are
Yep.
all going to tell me something, and those are really easy to see in a static assessment. But what I will often miss is what's happening with that lateral system.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes a next step that I'll sometimes do is just have somebody sway in place, both feet on the ground, hips to the right, hips to the left. And almost immediately you'll see something like that with a lot of
Yep.
clients. Like they go to the right and then they run into the left. They go to the
Yep.
right, boom, and they don't go to the left. Or vice versa, or they don't go either way. They're just stiff in both sides. So thinking about the lateral system and then rotation really is what I'm looking for a lot when they are doing something like running,
Yep.
or walking, even just walking, just is there mobility of the thorax? Do they rotate? Because a lot of clients, especially some of my older clients, just have stopped moving their thorax altogether when they walk. Right, their legs are moving, but their torso is staying quite still.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that. One of the things that I'll sometimes have, especially with my older clients too, are just standing hip circles
Yeah.
or
Yep.
side
Yep.
to side,
Yep.
because you're gonna find that I used to do it on the ball, sitting on the ball because the ball gave you that motion.
Yeah.
And I found it worked. It was great for the lumbar spine,
Uh
but
huh.
it took the hips out of it. When I
Yeah.
got them into standing, just going side to side, you could
Yeah.
see people being uncomfortable. They don't
Yeah.
go like, it's like my body doesn't do that anymore. And
Yeah.
then you try and have them circle, and it's like, I just want your femurs to be rotating in the
Yep.
sockets
They're like,
gently,
what?
however big you want the circle to be. And they're looking at you and they're thinking, how do I do this?
Yep. I'm not a hula dancer. What are you making me do?
Exactly. And I'm thinking, wow, you can't do this. And they may be in their 40s. It's not as though they're in their 90s, you know? And that's
Yeah.
sort of a, huh, okay. But again, it's just putting them through that motion. And like you said, you can't always see that in a static. In
No.
the static, all you can see is they look symmetrical right to left. They look symmetrical front to back. Their weight seems to be balanced. Okay. So again, I might think, oh, they're probably pretty good. Then you have them shift side to side. And you're like, ooh, something's going on there. You have
Yep.
them do a circle, and you're thinking, wow, you go one direction really well, but you sort of
Yeah.
do you, instead of an ellipse motion, you're kind of doing a half circle. Okay,
Or I see you're
that's
making an
interesting.
amoeba, like that. We're sort of like an amoeba. Like we're not getting circular. We're kind of getting, or a funky starfish. It's like whoa,
Exactly.
oh, oh, yeah,
Exactly, exactly. So yeah, so I find that motion is just as important because it tells me what's going on. So for me, the static assessment, and we've got a few minutes left. I just briefly want to say what I sort of look at when I'm looking at the static.
yeah,
You can tell me what you look at from the back as well as from the side. You said you look at symmetry. I obviously look at that, but I want to look at the head. Does it tilt
yep.
side to side?
Where is it?
Yeah, shoulder is
Yep,
one side higher than the other.
yep, yep.
Is there a curvature to the spine, a C curve, an S curve, or a lateral shift?
Yep.
And sometimes I'll even run my finger down their spine just because they may have a baggy shirt on or something
It's
like
not
that.
always easy to see where the spine actually is. I mean, people
No.
wear clothing that is very, very unrevealing for the spine often.
Yeah. And once you sort of touch the spinous process, you can pretty much feel if it's going to move. Do their hips are one side higher than the other?
Mhm.
I look at their knees. Are they turned in?
Or turned out.
Turned out.
Mhm.
Their feet, are they really bowed in? Are they,
Yep.
are their ankles shifted in? So I look at that from behind. And again, you can do that quickly. And
Mhm.
from the side, forward head carriage, rounded shoulders, sway back posture, anterior pelvic tilt. I even look at abdominals to see, do they just let them hang out? Is it just
Right.
that they have no
Yep.
control? So it goes into a lordosis because they have no abdominal control,
Right.
you know, and go
Yep.
into that anterior tilt. Do they lock their knees?
Yep.
So these are just the things that I glance at for me that I see from the side, from the back, that give me that quick snapshot. Then I'll take them into specific movement patterns
Mhm.
where will tell me more. And often what I saw in the static will either be, confirmed and validated, or, oh, like your person, oh no, they have a lot more range of motion than I thought. They just need a lot more stability, strength, whatever.
Right. Right. Exactly. Postural. Choosing a different posture instead of relaxing into their collapsed position. Yeah. So exactly symmetry where the ribs are relative to the pelvis, where the pelvis is relative to the feet. All those things. Just getting a sense of where they hold themselves. But
Hmm.
again, typically in a static assessment, their legs are together, or at least they're in the same plane with each other.
Yep.
One is not necessarily turned out. So I watch that, and then again, I really do like to see if I can catch them getting more relaxed. We have a longer conversation. Maybe I'm standing in front of them. We're just chatting about this. Just say, tell me a little bit about your story. So, we finish whatever we're doing at the desk, and then we stand up and start talking. Tell me a little bit about da da da. Let's have them
Yep.
chat with me for a moment or two. And I'll watch them then relax into, okay, what I would think I was seeing in their static, where the ribs shift to the right, their hip, oh, yep, there they go. And that right hip's now turned out. And then, okay, that tells me a little bit more. Again, in a very
I
simple
like
way.
that.
Yeah.
No, I like that. And you know, I think I do that unconsciously without even really realizing it,
I know you do. I've seen you do it.
you know. One thing that I tell most of my clients, and this I find, the first session, I say, look, I'm learning a lot about you. Today is my official assessment of you.
Mhm.
But our first session is going to be an assessment as well,
Yeah. Yep, yep,
because I said we are people pleasers. So that first assessment, chances are you were trying without even knowing it. You were trying to please, you were trying to do things correctly. What your brain tells you is correct.
yep,
But the first time I start putting them through specific exercises is when their brain is now having to function on a much different higher level of doing it properly. Now I'm going to see a lot more. And I
absolutely.
might see them relaxed, and I might see them, do they just collapse when they sit in
Yep,
a chair? When they stand, do they sort of automatically hang out on one side? When they're lying down, do they have a huge arch to their back, or does their back automatically flatten completely?
yep,
Where's their head? Where's their neck? All of this kind of stuff that the first time I put them, they're going to be in good control of their body, or as good as they can be. But that first session tells me so much.
and that's that's where, I for the Advancement Principles program, we talk about assessor sizes,
Hmm.
which is basically a lot of the exercises you will typically teach a client on a first session
Yep.
anyway. If you're trying to just understand where their pelvis is and where their legs are and what their mobility is and what their strength is, all the things that you do, those are generally, I could think of many of them as assessments and exercises. And
Yep.
that's why that second time is always it. I also say, and I say this to, when I'm teaching students too, is like that first time, whatever that first assessment is, that first day you're with them, those are all just like, note to self, maybe, maybe. It could be
Yep.
that day. It could be, again, they're trying to please you. It could be something else. And then, it's not till I don't really commit to my understanding of that until I've seen them for
Hmm.
3 or 4 times. The other thing too, um, And I'm thinking one particular situation here where I had one client who their idea of what was correct. So when they were trying to do the right thing, it was not the right thing.
Yeah.
But and this was interesting. It was a client who was actually in a core line class, an instructor, and she had been taught from a young woman that when you sat down, you shouldn't fold at the hips. So you're trying to do a squat with a straight back,
Wow.
which she was told was more ladylike. So for
Okay.
her, a squat was not acceptable, like a regular
Hmm.
old squat, right? Where you're folding at the hips and the knees and your shoulders are over your knees and you're leaning forward. Like that was unacceptable to her feeling of what was proper movement.
Hmm.
So that was just interesting to come across, because occasionally I found that too with postural assessment, that somebody who's brought up a particular way or has a parent who bugs them, or a drill
Hmm.
sergeant like pulls back into military posture when they're
Yep.
being looked at. They really shoulders are back and neck is back, but that's not where they live.
Right.
That's just because that's their idea of what, and sometimes that's not the correct posture for them anyway, right?
Yep.
Because they flattened out their neck, they've flattened out their thoracic spine, and they've created a lot of tension that they don't need. So there's that little piece too. Just what is their belief system about what's correct?
Yeah. Yeah. Something else to think about that I want to throw out here. In science, we have something called the learning curve.
Yeah.
If you have someone do something for the first time that they've never done before, their
Yeah.
brain doesn't know how to do it.
Nope.
So you have them do a squat and they've never squatted before in their life. Yes, they've gotten up and down off the chair and all that sort of thing, but they've never done a formal squat.
Right. They never
So,
thought about it that way.
right. So you ask them to do it and it looks horrible. Well, in a month from now, after you've had them do squats semi regularly, suddenly they do it a whole lot better. So, judging that assessment, when I was working, doing lab work at the University of Hawaii, we would have everybody come in and perform the test. I did something called the Wingate test, which is a maximum exertion test on a bicycle. We would have every single person come in, and the first time they did it, we would mark everything down. We would make it seem like they were really doing it for real. And they were, but it was to get that learning curve out of the way because every single
Mhm.
person to a person got better the second time.
Yeah.
So we just told them we have to do it twice. And they're
Yeah.
like, oh, okay. So you're going to come back next week and we're going to do it again. Okay.
Perfect.
But that second time, now we actually recorded the information
Yeah.
and there was a big difference.
Yeah.
And that was sort of a real eye opener for me. So when you talk about exercises, there have been many times that I've taken an exercise that I would use as an assessment. Uh, but as you teach it and as they get better at it, well, guess what? The next time I assess them, man, you've improved. Well, of course they've improved. They've
Right.
gotten better. They've gotten more efficient.
Right.
Motor skills have occurred.
And if I'm teaching something as an exercise, I'm trying to see what they do without direction, without coaching, without knowing what they should do.
Exactly.
I mean, that's kind of that's what I think of the assessor piece as opposed to the exercise piece. Once I
Yes.
start coaching it and working on it and bringing their awareness to it, it becomes an exercise. It may be an assessment in a sense, but it's no longer the same that I would start with.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's something to keep in mind too, is when you are assessing somebody for the first time, don't over cue. See what they want to do naturally.
Yep.
Because if you do over cue, you're changing what they're doing. So if I
Yeah.
have someone squat and I want to see whether or not they shift from side to side, forward or back, do they have internal rotation of the femurs? All these kind of things are something that I'm going to look at with that. And we'll go
Mhm.
into, different exercises at another date. But you're looking at all these things. Well, if I'm telling them how to do it properly and you want to keep your knees apart, now balance on both feet now as you do, I've changed everything.
Yep. No, if I'm doing this assessment, it's like, okay, I'm just gonna have you squat. And now if they look at me like, "What is a squat?" I might just kind of do just I mean, I might do one. I
Demo
might
it.
just,
Yep.
I might just demo it pretty quickly, just like, just come on down like this. And I
Yep.
that's all I'm gonna do. Because that's what I wanna see. I wanna see what their strategy is.
Exactly. Exactly. No, and that's really what we want to look at. Just today's assessment is a snapshot of the person in front of me today.
Mhm,
It's going to be different next week. It's going to be different next month. And hopefully it's going to be different 6 months from now when we've worked with them for a period of time.
mhm.
And that's all it is that snapshot. And a reassessment is just taking a look at maybe take a look quickly at their posture, where has it changed? And again, it doesn't have to be formal, but you do want to take a look at and say, oh, okay, I see some changes here. Where you were here, now you're here. Or, when they are squatting, I'm thinking of a client that, I had doing squats and she could not control her femurs. They were all over the place. So I gave her a little band around her knees so she
Mhm.
could actually feel a little tension. And again, it was a light band. It was just to
Yeah,
give her something to
feedback.
feel.
Yeah,
Feedback is
feedback.
all I was looking for.
Yeah,
But her squat looked great. And I will assume when I take a look at it again without the band in 4 weeks or something, that she's probably adjusted enough and learned the exercise enough and created stability in her hips and her pelvis and everything else that she won't need that anymore. And
yeah,
that's the goal.
yeah.
So again, looking at that and being able to reassess it and realize, okay, now we can move on or do something different.
Awesome.
Yeah,
So postural assessment, we definitely use it. It's definitely,
it's
in
a
some
tool.
ways, it's a tool, and I would almost say, like, as part of our alphabet, if you think about all the tools in our toolkit of our
Mhm.
alphabet, it may be A, B, C, and D,
Yeah.
right? Like, it is part of the alphabet for sure, and it's a very useful part of the alphabet. Maybe it's I wouldn't really even call it the vowels. It's just like a few letters, right? I'm
It's
like,
a couple
It's
letters.
not that valuable," but it's a key part of what we do, and again, that's oftentimes where you can reassess and see the changes, where
Yep.
clients see the changes, and maybe posture is their critical issue, and then you're really going to work on it. Maybe there's other things that are more their critical issue, or other things you need to address to get their posture to improve. So it's also looking at what is the role their posture is playing in their situation, in their
Mhm.
condition, in their function or their activity. It may
Yep.
be critically important to what they're trying to do. It may be that that's not the critical thing. The critical thing is endurance, or it's mobility, or it's something else that really is the underlying limitation maybe for them. So just make sure it's part of your toolkit, but just one of your many tools.
Yeah. And this is going to be part one of two. And I say that because I think our next time we talk about posture,
Mhm.
which will probably be next week, uh, let's talk about the kinetic chain. Let's talk
Yeah.
about what muscles actually affect those changes. Because now that okay, here's what I'm looking at, here's what I might see. Okay, what are we going to look at now? what what exercises and what muscles and why when I work this muscle does it affect that postural change? Oh, that's interesting. I'm working my hips, but suddenly my shoulders are further back and I'm rotating better. Interesting. So let's talk a little bit about the kinetic chain,
Yeah.
how it can affect posture.
Which joints and which muscles change
Yeah.
things. Yeah. Yeah. Good.
Yeah. So again, part one of two, we'll hit that next week. So you'll have a little bit deeper understanding of where to go and what to do with your client once you see where their posture is and what changes can we make and maybe what changes should we make.
We also have a really exciting guest coming up, Karina
Yes.
Theck, who is a specialist in scoliosis and has a scolio Pilates program that she runs, is going to be joining us as a guest. So we're really excited to have her and just to talk about scoliosis, which many of you have requested, and which is a hot topic for
Yep.
sure,
And
and
depending
movement
on when
education.
this
Yeah.
and depends on when this lands. Honestly, I'm thinking of pushing her up, so we may actually put
This may
her
be after
before
her.
this may be after her. There's a
This may be after
possibility
her. Yeah.
because scoliosis is such a big deal. And again, we just talked about assessing posture.
Yeah.
Scoliosis is huge in the postural community.
Absolutely.
So it's something that we really want to touch on and we wanted to bring a professional on, someone who deals with it on a regular basis, that's their gig so
Yeah.
that we can learn a lot more about it. So stay tuned for that. And maybe it was before that. So if you hadn't heard it and it did come out before, go back in the archives and check it out. If you have any questions, comments, like I said, people have been hitting us up about scoliosis for a while and they do so on our email, moving convos movingconvos@gmail.com is the best way to get in touch with us. You can check out our social media pages. Moving Convos is on Instagram, Moving Conversations on Facebook. You can also see Nora's and my personal socials. If you go to the show page, it has all of them listed down, or just on Instagram, type in our names, will pop up usually. I'm under Fit for Life DC. I think you're Nora.stjohn.7.
Something like
So
that. Yes.
something like that. So yeah, so check us out. We're going to be posting a lot. Things are going to be changing over the next few weeks, social media wise. Hopefully you're going to see a lot more of us, and that'll be nice. So please like, subscribe, comment. That's really important. Comment. If you like something, say, I dig this, like it, love this part of it, or would love to see more on this. The comments really help in the algorithm so we can get seen by more and more people. We'd really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
So for Nora St. John, I'm Brian Ritchie. We'll see you next week.